Welcome viewers, Guy here from SWF Welding, and we're here today because I want to share this little C-clamp project that I like to do with my students. It's a very basic project, it's practical, and you're able to use it after it's done. It just doesn't go in the scrap bin, right? So you can see here that it's functional. We're able to clamp something down, and it's much cheaper than going out and buying yourself one of these. A lot of times we can build this thing with just random stuff you have around the shop. So stay tuned if you want to learn more. Okay, for this project you'll need a 1/2 inch by 13 by 10 inches long threaded rod. You'll need 1/2 inch 13 threaded connector. You'll need 2 1/2 inch by 13 threaded nuts. You'll need a 3/8 flat washer, a 1/2 inch flat washer, and 1/4 inch flat washer. You'll also need some 3/8 by 4.5 inch round bar. Now when it comes to your coupons, you can use whatever thickness you'd like. If you'd like a more robust C-clamp, then use some thicker plate. We use 1/8 of an inch or 12 gauge by 1.5 inches, and 6 of them at 6 inches long, and we've got 3 of them at 8 inches long. And this is just regular mild steel. In our case, we use cold rolled. These plates are ground down clean. Okay, so now it's time to start fitting our project together. We're going to have 3 separate triangles. They're all going to have outside corners. When you're fabbing this together, make sure that your corners are inside corner to inside corner. You don't want any overlap or anything like that. You want a nice groove so that your weld will sit into there. When you tack it up, start from one side of the plate, give yourself a little tack, and then move over to the opposite end. Once you have your 2 pieces tacked up, squeeze your angle together so that you can fit your 3rd plate in. Tack both sides of that one. You're going to repeat this 2 more times for your other pieces. This will be the same process. You're going to weld these out all at once, so fit all 3 together. Sometimes we come to that last outside corner piece and it's harder to fit up. Maybe your pieces were not exactly square. Regardless, you can take your hammer and sort of tap down on the top, and that'll open up the groove for you. Now that we have all 3 triangles tacked up, it's time to put some end caps on. I have little triangles cut, so in order to hold them or to set them into place, I'll tack a little rod on the end so that I have something to hold on to while I'm tacking that piece in. You can use anything. I'm just using an old 6010 or 7018 electrode here. Okay, now I'm going to drop my triangle down into the opening. This is where my threaded connector is going to sit on, so I'll grind that down after it's welded. I'm going to weld my 3 triangles now. I've decided to go from the top down in a downhill. I'm using MIG. Here you can see me coming downhill. My gun is pointed up towards the puddle. Make sure you're not pointing down whenever you're dragging from the top down. I'm set to about 17.5 volts and 200 wire feed speed. Keep it nice and uniform. Make sure your lenses are clean that you can see, and just run that down. It happens pretty quick. Now that you have all 3 pieces welded up, it's time to fit this thing together. In this image you can see that the triangles weren't welded out first. I don't recommend doing it this way. It's just a lot of added welding, and it becomes a little bit more difficult to weld in position as well. So on ours, we welded them out in 3 separate sub-assemblies. So this is pretty simple. You're making a C shape. Your longer 8-inch piece will be on one side, and you'll have your other 6-inch piece on the middle and on the bottom. Make sure you lay your piece flat when tacking it up. It'll make it easier when fitting. Okay, now it's time to assemble the threaded rod, the connector, the nuts and bolts, and the washer. Start by taking your 1/4 inch washer and plug welding it to the bottom of the 10-inch threaded rod. Once you have that welded, plug welded, you're going to take your 3/8 and your 1/2 inch flat washer. And you want to give yourself 3 or 4 tacks on them. You're going to weld those 2 together. Once you have those 2 welded, you're going to slip it on to the 10-inch threaded rod, and then you're going to add the 1/2 inch nut. Make sure you give yourself a little bit of space in between the flat washer and the nut. This will give you some room for that washer to pivot and to be able to move around a little bit. Okay, once you have your washers and nuts all tacked up, it's time to weld the threaded connector to the actual C-clamp. Now make sure that you thread your rod onto the connector before you tack it on, otherwise you won't be able to thread the rod on. Once you have your threaded connector on your C-clamp, you can now center it on your anvil, which is the little 1" by 2.5" plate that you're going to weld to the base of the C-clamp. So again, make sure that this is centered. The final move is to add the T-handle onto the threaded rod. Start by threading your second 1/2" nut onto the end and plug weld that onto the threaded rod. Then you can add your T, center your 3/8 rod, and weld around. And from this point you can go and you can weld the rest of the connector and the rest of the parts on your C-clamp.
So this project took me about 1.5 hours to complete. That's to cut my parts, to fit it up, you know, to weld it out. One thing I want to make sure that everyone's aware is when we're fabricating, when we're putting things together, you're going to notice that I created a few sub-assemblies and then I welded those out and then I put them together and I tacked it. The biggest thing is that we want to be tacking everything together and then welding it all if we can. In this case here, it made more sense to weld it out in 3 separate parts and then bring those 3 separate parts together, right? It's always best to have your piece welded in the flat if you can, right? So that's why I used the sub-assemblies, because I was able to rotate and have that weld joint. Well, in this case here, it was in the vertical down, but I was able to weld out that quickly, right? So that was a strategic move that I chose on this. So make sure that fit up is proper, and fit up is about 90% of welding. If you got poor fit up, then you're gonna have poor welding, right? Shit flows downhill. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Keep your lenses clean and play safe.